Okay, we have 9:30.
Okay, good morning. I would like to call the meeting to order for the Western Municipal Water District regular board meeting of January 21st, 2026 at 9:30. And Ms. Ford, may we have roll call, please?
Yes, thank you. Good morning. Director Gardner.
I am here.
Director Torres.
Here.
Director Denstedt.
Present.
Director Risby.
Good morning, I'm here.
Good morning, President Roten.
And I also am here. Good morning.
Thank you. Good morning, President Roten. You do have a quorum today.
Okay, thank you. I would like to invite Mason Wilcox, Operation Technician 1, Operations Mechanical Services Department, to come forward. He didn't know he had such a long title, huh? To lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance this morning. And can you tell us just a bit about yourself?
Yeah, so my name is Mason Wilcox. I'm in mechanical services. I'm an Ops Tech 1, and I've been with Western since July of 24.
Oh, great.
Join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. Ready? Begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Mason.
Thank you very much.
Is part of our program that we've been really successful with, where we bring in young employees that, aren't necessarily bringing years and years of skill, and we give them an opportunity and we train them, and it's been working out fabulously. So, Mason, thank you very much for joining
Great.
Western.
Thank you.
Right. Okay, we'll move on to the public comment section of our meeting. Do we have any public comments this morning?
President Roten, we do not. I have no request to speak in the room, and I've received no written comments.
Okay, thank you. And we'll move on to presentations. 5A, Understanding the Delta Islands Metropolitan Water District Briefing.
So we've got 3 presentations today, so bear with us. But there was a request from the board to have a Delta Islands presentation some time ago. Randall Neuendijk is here. Thank you very much for coming. Randall's actually from the Sacramento area, so he's coming down here to give us his presentation. But he's one of Met's Delta experts, and we're very fortunate to have him here. Randall, thank you very much.
Thank you, Craig. President Roten, members of the board. So for today's presentation, we did put some pictures and videos in it, so you don't have to listen to my voice the whole time. We also have 2 experts in the room here. Luis Cetina, who's been at Metropolitan for a number of decades. He used to work in Bay Delta, is an expert in it, and a number of other things. And Melinda Stalvey, who works in Bay Delta. She's doing one of our largest strategic initiatives right now on one of the islands, and has also worked in water quality. So if I can't answer questions, I'm sure they can. I wanted to focus in on 4 areas of the presentation today. The first one was where's the islands in the Delta located? Secondly is why did we originally purchase the islands and what has changed? Third, what is the strategic initiatives the staff is advancing on the islands are consistent with Metropolitan's board policy? And last, what is the process that we're going through with the board in valuing the islands, not only the benefits, but also the costs and the risks? The slide that you have for you is just a picture of the Sacramento and San Joaquin Valley and associated watersheds. Just to get a little sense that water from both the north and the south flow right into the Delta and then out to the San Francisco Bay. If you compare it to the Colorado River, sometimes you look at the Colorado and you see these big, deep valleys and stuff, but the Bay Delta actually produces more water than the Colorado River. On a maximum size, Colorado River would have about 20 million acre-feet a year. The Bay Delta would have 40 million acre-feet a year. On an average, the Bay Delta has about 20, and the Colorado, about 13 million acre-feet a year. So it's a rather large system. To get a little more specific, our water starts at the state project water in the north there called Oroville Reservoir, comes down the Feather River, down into the Sacramento River. portion of it goes out into the ocean and bay to kind of provide a saltwater a break there from the saltwater coming in. And another portion, a smaller portion, goes through the central part of the delta to the state and federal pumping plants, and then down further down in the state water project, California Aqueduct, and the Central Valley Project Aqueduct. That central portion, we've been referring to it as our freshwater pathway. So the islands that Metropolitan purchased in 2016, our board authorized the purchase of 4 in the Central Delta. Those are the orange color. And then 1 out in, part of that purchase was a smaller portion out at the Sassoon Bay. You can see it on the left side of the map there. It's in green. That small island was sold to DWR for compensatory mitigation back in 2021. We still own those 4 in the Delta. I also wanted to show you the current proposed Delta Conveyance Project tunnel route. This is on the eastern side. So what has changed? Why did we initially buy these islands? I'm going to stay with this because it helps out a little bit. The original proposed tunnel alignment was directly underneath those islands. So the islands were purchased by the board to assist in developing that project. They were going to be used for tunnel portal sites. They're going to be used for project mitigation, eventually turned over to the state for those reasons. There's another big change too. The original tunnel configuration was a twin tunnel. It was a larger tunnel size. That got reduced to a single tunnel. So what that means is that most of the water, 80% of the water, is still going to go through that delta area. So in the past, even though in the past a lot of the water was going to go through the tunnel, less reliable in the delta, now what we're seeing is we have to maintain that delta. It's not a question of if, it's we have to maintain the delta. One of the other key things about the delta too is when I look at our system, we have engineers maintaining the metropolitan system. We have engineers and whole companies, not just engineers, excuse me, but maintaining both metropolitan system, another company, Department of Water Resources, maintaining the California Aqueduct. But there's no single entity maintaining this system here. The Department of Water Resources doesn't do it, the federal doesn't do it, there's no water agency. So this is kind of an unmanaged portion of our system that's still very critical to our water supply reliability. So again, I went over some of what the initial focus and the changes. We are also going to use the island to promote land subsidence. One of the projects that Ms. Stalvey is working on right now is ecosystem restoration. We'll talk about that in a second. Again, the switch from the twin tunnels to the single tunnels. But even though it's evolved, our board policies are still consistent with the approaches that we're pursuing out there. And we've done a lot of expert analysis that says we can maintain the delta, we can improve those levees to withstand earthquakes, to withstand some of the, to aid ecosystem and adapt to climate change in the future. Again, not only are we out there implementing some of the strategic initiatives, but we also developed a kind of a plan for our board to look at what are the milestones out there. Are we implementing the milestones? What is the value of owning the islands? We have a financial plan on the islands looking at revenues and cost, and we're going to be giving an update on that in February. We're also pursuing other funding partners, not only state and federal, but local as well. To give you an example, and grants to Melinda Stalvey just got a $20 million grant for her project. And then again, the board is looking at that value assessment of all the projects we're doing. So here's just kind of some graphics on some of the projects we're looking at. But they're really focused on trying to resolve these 4 issues: seismic and flood issues, sea level rise, ecosystem and fishery, and then subsidence. The delta is like New Orleans. It's made of peat soil. The land is subsided. So these islands really aren't islands. They're really bowls with levees around them. But if those bowls, the levees break, just like New Orleans, water's going to rush in, and that's going to be salt water, and it's going to stop our conveyance in the delta for 6 months or longer. So how do we resolve that? One of the things we're doing, we've been working with local interests, state and federal, and developing a better design levee, one that can withstand these earthquakes. We actually used we didn't use, the engineer who developed Diamond Valley Reservoir came and helped us in this design for these new improved levees. Here's some of the studies that we've been doing over those years since 2008. You can see both state and federal agencies, universities, both north and south, and even experts in seismic that do projects around the world. This is a project in the background that UCLA was doing, and you can see the peat soil underneath some of those gentlemen's foot moving as that weight gets moved back and forth. We're also working with Department of Fish and Wildlife and others on new invasive species and existing species out there like beavers. In fact, last week I got a call that there was a large hole in one of the levees, and we had a crew out there repairing them. That void, even though it's important for us, it's the home of some of these animals. So, you know, we have to be careful of what we do, but these species are out there, and we're trying to manage them effectively so that we can maintain an effective levee system. We're also working with local interests and actually international interests on new monitoring techniques. We're putting that wire you use for speaker wire. It's almost like you put it in the levee. We can see how the levee is moving up and down, right and left. We've done over 15 miles of levee improvement Metropolitan has alone. And that isn't using Metropolitan's money. We have $90 million in federal, state, and county grants to do it. You can see there that Bolden Island Flood Materials Depot. That was a $1 million grant that the county gave us for that. And then we're taking rock stockpiles. We have large, or DWR, Department of Water Resources, has large rock stockpiles situated around the delta. Now we are taking some of those large ones and we're putting the smaller ones, as you see, in various locations around each island. So if we do have an issue, we can get on it right away. We don't have to have travel time to get to the site. So what is the cost of just this levee thing? I got to ask the other day. So just those two yellow lines, that's what we call the freshwater pathway, to improve them up to this standard to meet flood, earthquake, and sea level rise. That would be 3 feet of sea level rise. Be about 400 to 700 million. That doesn't need to be done at once. Sea level rise happens very slowly, and this could be done over a series of 30 plus, years or more. We're not planning to do the full delta, but if someone was, you can see the costs down there at the bottom of the screen. We have received a grant to do some setback levees. This helps not only improve the levee design, but helps produce additional habitat for species and food as well. This is a very short video. It's about 2 minutes. It has sound. It's related to producing fish on our islands. I'll just let it play. Hopefully it works. Does the sound not work? We had it working. Do you want to come up and help me here? See if you can do it.
Study where we are putting Delta smelt out on the islands in our cages, and we're working with UC Davis, our partners with USGS, Department of Water Resources, and U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and hopes to study Delta smelt and how best to culture them out in more naturalistic settings.
The Delta smelt are listed as endangered both state and federally. We hope by using these impoundments to be able to produce enough fish, and we will have sustainable numbers.
Currently, they're trying to supplement the species by taking hatchery fish and introducing them into the wild. If the Bolden Islands study is successful, it can be used to inform our partner agencies in their efforts to culture Delta smelt. Right now, all the cultured fish are in tanks. Very sterile environments. Everything's very controlled. The technical expertise you need to man and operate them, plus the equipment, is really intensive and actually quite expensive.
So that's why we hope to be able to reduce the manpower to raise these fish by using more natural settings like the impoundments.
Using ponds is a low-cost and a very effective way of culturing Delta smelt in much larger capacity. You can scale those up much more quickly, much easier than you could these tanks. We've already had a primary deployment in November, and then we ended it in January. They did very well. They survived. They had some pretty good growth, a lot of great things. So I think we've already demonstrated this is successful. And our plans are to try to leverage that success, look at other islands and see if those impoundments might be useful, as well as other impoundment designs. We have a lot of ideas of what we can do for this.
I'm proud to be part of a research project that is meaningful and that has also very direct consequences for a fish population.
That's a pretty exciting thing to try to support Delta smelt out here in the wild. It's dynamic. They get day-night activity. It gets cold at night. It gets warm during the day. You have the winds, everything for them to eat naturally. If we want to use Delta smelt in the wild from the hatchery, we've got to give them all the tools for them to thrive and do well. And this is a way to do it.
So one of the reasons we're doing this is not just because we want to save the Delta smelt, but as you know, that little 2-inch fish, it really has a tendency, there's a lot of regulations that the state and federal agencies have put on us to reduce our pumping so that we do not entrain that species. The species has been declining over the number of years, so if we can utilize our islands to supplement those species, that helps us in regulatory flexibility. We also have the support of the gentleman from UC Davis, the professor who actually listed the species 20 plus years ago, is saying to us that this is a good thing to do. This is just a video of one of the ponds on this 5,000-acre island where they were testing some of the fish were in those little pods in the back, and they were testing these floating wetlands. The floating wetlands is something we're also looking at, and that would produce food for the species as well as help stop subsidence on the islands as well. This is a project, and I want to give Melinda Stalvey here credit for it. When she got not only a $20 million grant to do this, but she designed a project as 3 goals in mind. It's not only to, and Melinda, I'm not going to play your video here, but you can just see her talking. But it's 3 goals in mind. One is to stop subsidence on the island, at the same time improve the habitat ecosystem restoration, and produce revenue from it. Right now, on this island alone, we are just growing corn, which is reducing the land level by about 1 inch a year. So her project will stop that. It'll help sustain the levee system so we don't have to build the levees higher and higher. At the same time, it gives us additional revenue. It's a higher, she's looking at rice farming out there, which is a higher value crop. It'll bring more revenue into the island. Rice is a wet crop, so it stops subsidence. And then she can develop this habitat, which then she'll start applying for credits, potentially eco-mitigation credits, and our carbon sequestration credits from all the greenhouse gases she is able to sequester in the grain. So it's kind of a triple threat project. We're really excited. She's in the final stages. We still have to bring this back to the Met Board for approval, but yeah, we're looking forward to that. Thanks, Melinda. And she's also working here with Campbell Ingham, who is the executive director of the Delta Conservancy, who provided us the grants as well. So when you look at it, we have these initiatives on the island. There's 3 of them related to levees and emergency monitoring to help try to reduce the risk of flood and seismic and sea level rise. Delta smelt supplementation to help out in the fishery issues, to give us more regulatory flexibility. And then some of this restoration that not only on Web Track, which Melinda's doing, but she's looking at other islands that we have as well. And that can also help stop subsidence. One of the, we're not just looking for, one of the strategic initiatives our board has asked to do is how about revenue generation? $90 million is a good start, and we're getting about $10 million a year. In grant funding, and in addition to that, we have agricultural leases. We're trying to change those to higher value crops that reduce subsidence as well. We have some funding coming in from cell tower leases. One of the big things on proposed new development out there is this underground carbon capture and storage. We haven't valued this, well, we've done some analysis, Lawrence Livermore National Lab, and they've showed us that we have a unique formation under these islands. It's nowhere else in the United States. We have 3 rock formations about 1,000 feet apart. We can store this carbon that's captured from industrial sources under the ground. The analysis done by the state, by the Delta Conservancy, and by Lawrence Livermore shows this could, for us, it could be in the hundreds of millions of dollars a year of revenue for us. We're starting that analysis and continuing it. We're working with some folks in the Delta. We've brought some of the initial results to the Metropolitan Board, but this is something we're looking into because it's almost too good to be true. And so we really want to look at it before we promote it too much. There's some other things that I mentioned there that we're doing as well. And as just a couple last slides here, these are some of the collaborators we're working with, a lot of NGOs you can see here as well. And then lastly, we brought a number of updates on the Delta Islands to our board. Our board is still valuing this process and assessing it. What is the benefits? What is the value of it? What is the risk and what is the cost? We're bringing another one in March 2026. There'll be, I'm sure, some robust discussion at our board about these islands. Do we want to keep them? Do we need additional partners, or do we just want to outright sell them? So that'll be that meeting scheduled for March 23rd. Madam Chair, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Okay, any questions or comments from board? Oh, looks like we have one.
Well, just a couple comments. Thank you for coming and doing this presentation. This was something that I wanted to share with my colleagues here as we move forward in decision-making process. And as I've mentioned before, Met's board, as we continue to deliberate over this, is value versus cost versus benefit versus a lot of other things. And there have been some concerns over whether or not we should just get out of the business of owning the islands. Does it really preserve a benefit for us or not? Like you said, we did enter into some partnership agreements with some ag folks over there and doing some leasing of that land, and that has some benefits. But it really comes down to, if we're going to be in the Delta, are we going to be good partners in the Delta? And I think Metropolitan has done an absolutely fabulous job at showing we have vested interest, right? And we're up there doing our projects and taking care of things and want to be valued partners and collaborative with the community up there. We're not just up there to steal the water, right? Which has been always the challenge, right, that comes out of this. And I think that's also why the chair has now tried to pivot a little bit too, to do more of the headwaters tour and really say that, all of the water is not coming out of the Delta, it's actually coming out of the headwaters, and trying to change some of the narrative to tell a true story and paint a true picture. So this has just been an interesting piece of the component. Now I see, because I think I'm due for a state tour this year coming up in our next tours, and now I see some things I want to take a look at. I'd really like to see the deployment of where you guys put out the smelt and look at those out there. I have gone up there on a number of tours. I look forward to having all of you guys at some point come in and sharing these tours with me and taking a look at some of the things that we've seen. I have such a wonderful time when I go up there to talk to staff, and I really want to dig in. I want to go out there with the wading boots on and see the stuff that's going on, because that's what it's really about. It's really fascinating to see some of the wildlife up there. We went out to, what was the facility the duck hunters have up there? We went to some lodge or something for lunch.
Oh,
and
Gray, I forgot something, Gray something Lodge. I can't remember the name of it,
Yeah, but there's so much going on up there that you just never hear about. And it was just fascinating to me how many different projects and how much activity is actually going on that us down in here in Southern California just don't hear about. So, you know, I'm glad that this was something that you guys were interested in hearing about and listening to. We've got some, like you said, board updates and some decisions that are going to be put before us. I'm glad we're getting more grant money. That makes the decision much easier if we're getting money thrown at us to do and continue to do the work that you guys are doing. And I think this is a great time for the discussion to figure out what we're going to do and what we're going to go forward with and what the Delta looks like. And like you said, you know, a lot of these projects and the money that's going to be contributed to this is going to happen over a great period of time. So we really need to take a consideration of the time, the energy, the investment that will literally be going for a generation.
Yeah.
You know, and what that looks like for us. So decisions that we make today far affect our future. And that's also something that sits heavily on my mind as I move forward the decision-making process and learn more about what's going on up there and what we need to do and what our partnerships mean. So thank you for everything that you guys do up in the Delta. You know, you really represent Metropolitan well, and you really do bring value to the table. So I appreciate your sacrifice of being away from the home agency, right, and being out in the outskirts and doing your things. You're not a forgotten piece of Met by any means, certainly not by me. And I look forward to my next tour up there. Thank you for coming.
Sure.
Very good. Anyone else? I do have just one question that is still floating around up here. It was back toward the beginning of your slides. You had a map of the watershed. I don't know if we can go back to that.
Yeah, I think we
It was
can.
one, yeah, I don't know if that it was the first one, but, no, this one. Nope, the one you had just before this. Wait. Okay, I'm sorry, the other one. So, this always puzzles me, and not just with the Delta. So, to me, in my limited brain, I always think of the water flowing from the top of California down to the bottom. But this looks to me like, so does the San Joaquin River flow to the north into the Delta?
Correct, yeah, it flows to the north.
Yeah, that just, in my logic that is not longtime water person. So anything that is south of the Delta, those flows are actually coming up into the Delta. And then if
Yeah.
it's north, it's going down into
Yeah.
the Delta.
Yeah, the only, if you look there, I also put the North Coast watershed, but that was off limits to the Wild and Scenic Rivers, both state and federal. But even those flow, I guess, west to the ocean, and that's significant water there too.
those flow
California actually has a lot of water. That's actually over 20 million acre-feet of water flowing that way. When you look at it, I have another chart that shows the watersheds. Again, Colorado's got this massive watershed. This is a much, much smaller, about a third the size, but it produces more water. It kind of comes up like a sponge and hits that Sierras and then dumps it out. So it's very interesting.
Yeah, okay, thank you. I just wanted to try to get a better picture of that in my head. So, well, thank you very much.
Sure,
I
thank
appreciate
you.
your traveling down and giving us that.
Yeah, If I can, real quickly, just,
Yes, Mike.
I want to thank you for the presentation. It's really interesting. I spent some time in the Delta and understand it a little bit. And this just reinforces the sensitivities of, and the vulnerabilities of the Delta. It's a huge resource for all kinds of things, and people don't understand how fragile it is and how easily it can be dramatically impacted by any number of things. So I'm impressed with what Met is doing. It's a very good presentation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, with that, we can move on to our second presentation, item B, annual year-end state legislative update from KP Public Affairs. Mr. Miller.
Well, yeah, this is our annual update. Ed Manning and Brenda Bass are going to be sharing the presentation. We had our federal presentation last month, so we'll do state today. So, Ed, it's all yours.
Great. President Roten and members, nice to see you again.
Good morning.
I've done this multiple times over the years. It's always a pleasure. I'm here with my colleague Brenda Bass. Is this the first time?
No, last year.
I'm getting old. Anyway, glad to present to you. I'm going to present the first slide, and then Brenda's going to do the rest, but of course, we're both here available for questions as well. So, I always tell all of our lobbyists, don't bury the lead. There it is. So, SB 72. I think, a culmination of many years of work by your team, Craig, Sarah, Michael, myself, Brenda, Carolyn Jensen before that, who used to be here with me. A Herculean effort that was ultimately successful. A lot of times these efforts to try to make progress on major policy in Sacramento often take multiple years, and you often fail several times before you're successful. But you slowly matriculate the ball down the field, as a famous coach said once. So it takes commitment, and this board is to be congratulated because you were totally supportive and committed, and we appreciate that greatly, because that's what it takes to get something like this done. And I will let you know, and I'm sure you've heard from Craig, Sarah, and Michael about this, but we didn't waste any time celebrating for too long, because at the recent Aqua meeting in the fall, we had DWR in the room and spent a couple hours at the Water Summit that Western organizes, already talking about implementation. And so, I always say, in some respects, as hard as it was, that's just sort of like the foundation when you think about it, to update the California Water Plan and to have a supply goal in statute for the first time for California. But the next level is where the rubber meets the road, and often the water community falls down, candidly, which is the staying power to get in front of DWR. There's going to be a new governor in place, the next administration, to make sure now that the water plan actually has the right people advising DWR, and that the goals that we have in the statute are reflected in the plan. And then ultimately, when Craig and I were talking about this several years ago, my goal and his was to embed sort of real important infrastructure, statewide infrastructure, in the plan, and then make that a priority for the next water bond. Because what we found is the water bonds sort of become sort of a political mishmash of a variety of people's funding preferences without an overriding consciousness of what the state needs and what we all need in terms of new water supply. So if we can achieve those in the longer term, then this will truly be transformational in its impact. And so that's what we'll be working on next, along with everything else that's going on in the legislature. And with that, I'll hand it off to Brenda.
Thank you, Ed. Good morning, everyone. Following off on that, we'll talk a little bit about the state political dynamics going into 2026. At the beginning of this year, there was a legislative leadership change in the state Senate, with Monique Limon replacing Mike McGuire as the new Senate pro tem. And that has come with several changes to other committees up there in the state Senate. Most importantly for Western is the new Senate Natural Resources and Water Committee chair, which is going to be Senator Josh Becker. I'm sort of pleasantly surprised by this move. He previously chaired Senate Energy and Utilities, a very thoughtful and pragmatic member. So while he doesn't have a lot of hands-on experience with water, I think he has the capacity to learn and get really into our issues and try to be solutions-oriented. So yeah, all the interest this year in terms of leadership changes is on the Senate side. Assembly leadership is staying pretty constant. No changes of note over on the Assembly side. So that means that Diane Pappin remains chair of Assembly Water, Parks, and Wildlife, and Robert Rivas remains speaker. Then the next big change is obviously going to be the new governor, because this is Newsom's final year. And so as we saw last year, this final year will also reflect his more national ambitions and see what he can tie together to create a legacy for himself. And we know that affordability is going to be another huge issue for the legislature and for the governor this year. And so we shall see how that affordability narrative gets woven into policy this year. He just released his first stab at the budget this year, which is pretty positive, all things considered. I mean, we're still looking at a deficit, but it's not looking as bad as we thought it would be. And some of that is due to sort of AI generating a lot of revenue for the state. Remains to be seen whether that's a bubble or not, but a lot of that positivity, I think, is kind of one time and may not be enough to fully smooth out the deficit that we're seeing years into the future. Yeah. All right, water bill highlights from last year. We just talked about SB 72, huge win for the water community. Updating the California Water Plan, despite getting a similar bill vetoed last year, we got a signature on the bill this year, and it's a huge success for Western and for CMUA. So again, everybody should feel very proud of the work that we've done on that. So then we had AB 523 by Assemblymember Irwin. That bill authorized proxy voting for Met member agencies with certain conditions. That was signed into law, so that gives us additional flexibility if representatives can't make a meeting, which is helpful. Then we have AB 532 by
Can I stop you there for a second, just for a note on this one? The proxy voting, it appears that our first proxy vote will be cast next month.
Oh.
And the person who is actually going to be doing the very first proxy vote, because he's going to apparently leave the country, is the chair. And he announced that at last meeting. Just wanted to put that out there.
Right,
So.
yeah, that's convenient that timing happened, yes. Next, we have AB 532. This was a CMUA-sponsored bill that would have given permissive authority for water providers to develop a low-income rate assistance program, or a LIRA program. Western supported this alongside a lot of other CMUA member agencies and ACWA member agencies. Unfortunately, that bill did get held in Senate Appropriations and didn't move forward. At the same time, there was a competing bill, SB 350, by Senator Durazo, which would have created a LIRA program to be administered by the State Water Board, but it was using funds that were kind of not real. I mean, there was no real identified source for where the money was going to come from. And so that bill was also held, meaning that we really didn't see any movement on the LIRA issue this past year. But as we've seen in past years, LIRA is a perennial issue. Affordability is a perennial issue. So I don't think this is not the end of the discussion on LIRA. AB 794 by Assemblymember Gabriel would have given the State Water Board the authority to adopt maximum contaminant levels for PFAS compounds through an emergency rulemaking process. Right now, they have to go through a very formal rulemaking process with a long, public engagement process, and this would truncate all of that by allowing it to go through emergency regs, which was problematic for a lot of water agencies. This bill did stall on the Assembly floor and did not move forward and won't be moving forward again this year. The State Water Board, in the meantime, is still working on PFAS issues. This doesn't mean that PFAS won't be regulated. It just means that it won't be going through the truncated emergency regulation program, at least pursuant to this bill.
No, just one comment on that is that this is part of an alarming trend of shifting the regulatory process. Emergency regulations basically have virtually no public input, no real review, and don't have the same consideration or scientific input that you need to do serious regulations on regulating chemicals in water supply. Those decisions have multi-billion-dollar impacts on water agencies, along with the health impact. So, long story short, Brenda and I are experiencing this more and more, where they're trying to go around the regulatory process to allow for emergency regulations, and we're actually working on legislation with the New California Coalition and the Business Roundtable to try to shift back and actually bring more input into the process, do a better economic analysis than we do now, because we don't do a real one. The agency proposing the regulations actually does their own analysis as opposed to an independent third party. So anyway, I just highlight that because it's a trend that really the trend should be going in the other way, because the legislature's increasingly frustrated that they're getting blindsided by regulatory agencies on major decisions that have enormous impacts. And people, regular folk, they don't know the difference between an agency and a legislator. So the legislators are getting all the pushback. And then they're saying, how did this happen? Well, if you give the keys to the car to someone and you let them drive it, that's how it happens. So they need better information too. So anyway, enough of me editorializing.
Oh, no, that's a really important context, because it is something that we're seeing in a lot of contexts, this idea like, oh, just on this one issue, we're going to go and do emergency regs, and it's totally fine because we all agree that PFAS are bad, for example, and it's like, well, it becomes kind of a problem because we also know that it's very expensive to treat for things like PFAS, and there should be like transparency in that decision-making process, right? AB 362 by Assemblymember Ramos had to do with tribal beneficial uses of water within the water quality context, and would have required incorporation of defined beneficial uses for tribal uses in basin plans. So when I wrote this slide, it had stalled on the assembly floor, but could have moved again in January because the author was trying to take it off of the inactive file. He did take it off of the inactive file, but last week it went back on inactive because there was no agreement on anything and there was not enough willpower to move it. A lot of issues with this bill, including but not limited to a huge state cost for both the State Water Board and all of the 9 regional boards to incorporate these beneficial uses on a short time frame, and then to determine what like water quality standards are protective of those beneficial uses and all the various different segments of the watershed. So a couple of other issues with that, but really I think the cost was a huge issue, made a lot of legislators not sure that this was the right time and the right place to do this. So we had a little bit of a scare on this one, but now everything's back.
So what does that mean when it goes on the inactive file? Is it dead or?
Well, yes, sort of. I mean, it won't technically be dead until January 31st.
Oh, okay.
But if it's on inactive, then it's not part of the like file business, so to speak.
Yeah, I mean, basically it's these are bills, what happens we're in the second year of a 2-year legislative term. There are bills that are left over from last year.
Right.
That didn't make it out of the first house. Either it was introduced in the assembly in this case and never made it out of the assembly. So you've got this window in the second year of 1 month to try to breathe life into your usually problematic bill, because there's a reason it didn't pass. And so he took it off an active file, hoping he could get the votes to get it off the assembly floor and move it. It's not happening.
No.
So now that it's on inactive again, If it doesn't move by the end of the month, which it won't, then that bill's dead. Now, having said that, we have a new window where bills
Yes.
can be introduced by the third week of February for the second year of the term. So he could introduce a new bill. if he
Right,
wants.
yes.
So this is why the issues never died. it
Right.
seems like,
Yeah,
But,
yeah.
It
but
does
this
get
is good
recycled.
because it would have jammed everybody with a bad bill without time to fix it. So.
Right, yeah. CMUA and Aqua were highly engaged in that, and,
And
yeah.
is that different than consciously deciding something's going to be a 2-year bill? Like SB 72, the first time we started with 1 year, and then the author said, no, I'm going to make this a 2-year bill. Is
So
that
this is-
different from this?
Essentially, this is year 2 of the session.
Right.
So when we say 2-year bill, that means you parked it the first year and decided not to advance it, wherever it is in the process.
Oh, okay.
So it's a little bit different because a lot of 2-year bills are bills that made it to the second house
Mm,
and then got stalled for whatever reason. So it's sort of like, okay, I'm going to take a time out.
yeah,
I'm not going to try to move it this year because I can pick up where I left off the second year.
Okay.
So it's a little different nuance, but.
okay.
yeah.
Right.
Thank
If
you
it
for
d- yeah,
explaining that.
If
Yeah,
it doesn't
no,
make it
it's-
out of the first house, then you have this really short window in January. So that's the main difference between this and like SB 366, the predecessor to SB 72, because it was already in the second house. We had more time to move 366, but this bill, since it never got out of the first house, had a speed run to try to get out.
Yeah, by the
And
end of
Okay.
January,
Yeah.
or it's dead. Yeah, so, yeah.
Interesting.
the calendar is super fun.
It's, yeah, right.
Wow.
Yeah, January of the even years is always a rush. Speaking of 2-year bills, well, that moves us right into SB 601 by Senator Allen. This would have created a new water quality permitting program for the state that ultimately creates a lot of confusion and implementation issues. So the impetus behind this bill is a Supreme Court decision in 2023, the Sackett decision, which dealt with the delineation of wetlands and whether they're in or out of the definition of waters of the United States. And folks, well, the proponents of this bill interpret that decision to have rolled back federal protections. I think most people would kind of agree on that, although you can quibble, as you always can with anything to do with waters of the United States. And so this bill sort of came out of this idea that if there's less federal protection, then we need to increase state protection. Of course, as we well know here in California, we have a very robust state-level water quality law in Puerto Cologne, which is really unique. No other state has anything near what we have in Puerto Cologne. So this kind of creates almost like a third category for ill-defined segment of waters called nexus waters. Like, they used to be waters of the United States, but now they're not, and it's not all these things. It's a very messy kind of list. It originally had a very problematic private right of action, so citizens could come and sue you if they thought you were out of compliance with this part of what would now be state law, which is a sea change from the current setup in state water quality law. But last year, the opposition coalition, which included a lot of the organizations that you're members of, were able to remove that private right of action, which was a huge win. The continued issues with some of these other implementation issues and penalty concerns ended up stalling the bill in the assembly. So that's in the second house. So that means they've got until the end of the year this year to try to fix all of their issues with it. So that bill will definitely be coming back. I think there's some new issues being raised with the State Water Board having come out with a plan or a report really on what they think the impacts of the Sackett decision are. And their analysis of what they might need is not quite exactly what this bill does. And so it will be very interesting to see how everything interacts and to see if we can address some of the issues with this bill, or maybe even try to shift its focus into a better and more productive lane. We already talked about SB 350. I believe Michael's going to go through all of these in much more detail, but these are sort of the 2026 legislative priorities for Western. They'll look fairly familiar. Obviously, number one is supporting the implementation of SB 72 and providing leadership on assisting the state in meeting their water supply targets. And we're well on our way to doing that, programming very well with DWR in that regard. Again, opposing measures that would halt or delay Delta conveyance or Sites Reservoir, supporting measures to streamline and modernize the permitting process for water-related projects.
Just one comment related to that. We didn't mention this earlier, but we were very active in trying to help the state water project contractors and Metropolitan last year when the governor was trying to propose a trailer bill to streamline the permitting process for Delta conveyance. Unfortunately, I worked on, I say this sort of facetiously, but I worked on the Delta Protection Act, which was 2008, and helped negotiate that. At the time for Westlands, we were at the table with Met to make this great deal, which was going to create the path to conveyance, and here we are, it's 2025, and we're not even done with the studies and permitting yet. Not exactly progress. So one could say that we need some help on the permitting side with the water board and elsewhere to have some streamlining. That wasn't successful last year, but I just want to highlight that the reason that's a goal here is because we're constantly looking for opportunities to see if we can try to, get rid of barriers that are really unwanted and unnecessary, that are slowing everything down and costing Southern California ratepayers real money. So anyway.
Right, yeah, and from time to time we get bills that are specifically focused on slowing things down, like Delta conveyance or,
Last year we killed an audit request from
Yes.
a Delta member that would have, tortured the state water project contractors and DWR by auditing, the Delta conveyance project, which has been scrutinized all along the way. So that's an example of the types of activities that come up that we're, why these principles are so helpful, because we can jump into action.
Yes.
So.
yes, we've got LIRA still here with some caveats that focus on flexibility and no water taxes or fees to fund it. And then finally, supporting legislation that reinforces the role of water agencies as providing fire flow for individual structure fires, but not wildfire disaster events. This is in line with, I think, our positions last year and coming out of some of the narratives around the LA fires a year ago. And I know Aqua's pursuing legislation that helps clarify this a little bit as well. So definitely a hot topic to clarify going into a new year where we've got a lot of clarity from the lessons learned a year ago. So what do we have on deck for this year? I think we're still working toward an education effort on California Water for All. Water rights. It's always potentially an issue. There's always rumors that a water rights bill is going to pop up this year. It's been a couple of years, but the Planning and Conservation League did produce a white paper in 2022 that spurred a slew of water rights bills in 2023 and 2024. And it has several ideas that have not yet been sort of turned over into the legislature. So it may continue to be a source of proposal for folks who want to overhaul the water rights system. So it's something we will keep an eye out for as bills get introduced this year. As I said earlier, affordability and LIRA always ripe to come back, and as we've seen, sometimes it can be with competing pathways, something that's more flexibility focused for the water agencies versus something that is more consumer focused. Water quality was pretty quiet, but last year showed that sometimes water quality can be a really hot topic. We saw the MCL bill with PFAS, and we still have SB 601 to wrap up, which may also interact with federal waters of the United States rule changes in a more narrow definition as well. Groundwater management is a perennial issue of interest, I feel like, for the legislature. And again, every time there's a dry year, it gets worse. I know subsidence is becoming an issue even for folks on the water agency side, so it will be interesting to see how that all shakes out. Proposition 4, that's the climate bond that passed in 2024. There's an effort right now that Western is supporting to streamline the APA process for the bond funds. This is something that's typical for bond funding, where it kind of streamlines the ability for the state board or DWR to take the money that the legislature gives them from the bond and get it out to grant recipients as soon as possible. AB 35 is the vehicle this year that's moving along pretty well on that front to streamline that effort. Huge coalition of support from water agencies to environmental groups and community water groups. It's basically anyone who thinks they might get Prop 4 dollars is part of that. And then finally, infrastructure permitting and CEQA relief is another big issue that probably will come to the fore this year. There's a ballot initiative that's been proposed that would streamline CEQA and other permitting requirements for infrastructure, including water infrastructure. And there's a possibility that this ballot initiative will spark some sort of a legislative solution that might obviate the ballot initiative. It remains to be seen where that goes, but I think the existence of that initiative shows that CEQA and permitting reform for infrastructure may be a hot topic this year. Here's a little bit of the regulatory landscape. I think the biggest one and the biggest change from last year, everything else is kind of continuations of the same, is that DWR is starting to implement SB 72, starting to figure out how it's going to put its arm around the new advisory committee, and we're actively getting involved in that. Otherwise, water rights proceedings are still going on for sites, for Delta conveyance. State Water Board still has a lot on its plate on the regulatory front, including updating the Bay Delta plan to incorporate the Healthy Rivers and Landscapes agreements. And then they still have a long list of drinking water MCL updates that they said they would do back in 2024, and I don't think they've gotten to a final rule on any of them. So that is an effort that is still going on with them. And as always, there's a potential for state reaction to any federal changes. So we may see something in regard to that now that there's noise about a WOTUS rule change.
Before you go on, I just have a quick question. I'm not seeing, it was back on your legislative landscape, and maybe it just didn't rise to the occasion to be on the slide, but I haven't seen anything about conservation as a way of life. As far as, is that just continuing to sail through, or?
We've moved beyond it.
Unfortunately.
Or fortunately, one of the.
Right, I mean, like, there haven't been, it's been quiet on that front legislatively for the last couple of years.
Yeah.
I think we're kind of in an implementation situation with that.
We fought, there are a number of, for several years, a lot of this happened during the Governor Brown's administration and during the teeth of the drought. But there were several bills passed that were, had all sorts of new requirements. And you'll remember when Governor Brown just put on these strict numeric, sort of everybody cut X percent, and then realized, oh, well, if somebody already made a bunch of cuts, that's really draconian, and other people haven't made cuts. So obviously, they revisited all of that. We passed legislation revising, urban water management plans, ag plans, all sorts of stuff. And then there have been a bunch of battles at the water board over implementation. And so, as Brenda said, we're sort of out of the legislative realm on that and really into the implementation phase with the regulations pretty much done and all the regional water, all the retail water agencies implementing all these different reporting requirements and conservation requirements. So.
Okay. I guess what I'm hoping is, as it continues down that line, is that there'll be some folks that start to push back as it gets more and more difficult or more and more costly. So I'm just curious if maybe it'll come back.
I will tell you, Madam President, that there were some things in there that were very difficult for a lot of water agencies in terms of how they got to some of the requirements. And so I think it remains to be seen on the implementation, how it goes and how costly it is. And as we see that, I think there will be a chance ultimately to revisit the issue, especially with the new administration coming in.
All right. Thank you.
Yep.
Yeah. Yep, we're here at the end now. Here's kind of an overview of all of the key legislative dates for the year. Yes, we've got February 20th as the deadline to introduce new legislation. That's when we'll start getting a sense of what's going to be on the table in the legislature this year. And then, everything else is pretty standard in terms of when we would see changes and movement from bills to one house to another. Of course, June 15th is the deadline to pass the state budget, so we will have a budget by then and see what kind of deals come together and what kind of trailer bills might materialize out of that.
I think that's it. August 31st will be done, so
yes.
We look forward to that date.
All right, that's it for us. So we're here if you have any other questions. And if not, thank you all for your time.
Any other comments or questions? Thank you so much for keeping track of all of that. Yes, sir.
I have a comment, if I
Mr.
may, Madam
Miller.
President.
Of course.
Well, I want to publicly in front of the board thank Ed and Brenda for all their work on SB 72. Things are made to happen, they don't just happen. And the amount of work that they did behind the scenes, getting it through committees, in the hallways, getting support. When I spoke at Water Parks and Wildlife, we had a line out the door of lobbyists saying "Me Too," and that comes from their hard work to make sure that it gets there. But, there's also a different level of support. It's one thing to hire a lobbyist that's reporting on what happens in the legislature. It's another thing to have a lobbying team that is actively making change and setting direction and setting policy and work really, really hard in our interests to make it happen. And so we're really fortunate to have them, but thank you for everything you did this year.
Appreciate it very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Gosh, that sounds like an endorsement for another year contract.
That's Brenda's problem.
At least. Very good. Okay, we'll move on to presentation 5C, Board of Directors Milestone Service Awards. Mr. Miller.
Well, I think it would be better to maybe do it down at the podium.
Okay.
So this is, I'll introduce President Roten because she's going to do the honors. But as we were going through this is something that we used to do.
Yes.
And since I've been here, we haven't done this. So I think we just kind of got out of the practice of doing it. But as we go through, we give our staff 5, 10, 15, 20-year service awards. And we haven't done that for the board. So we're going to catch up a little bit. So I thought maybe we could have the whole board just come down and President Roten could present our little 5-year gift to each of the board members, and Mike is here to take a picture of the gang. So
Okay.
why don't we go down to the front?
part of our meeting. Oh, yeah, so we will, is everybody ready? We'll move on to the consent calendar, items 6A and B. Do we have a motion to, or do we have any comments on consent?
We do not.
I will
Okay,
move approval.
okay, motion and a second whenever you're ready, Ms. Ford, for the vote.
Director Gardner,
Aye.
Director Torres,
Yes.
Director Dinstedt,
Aye.
Director Risby,
Aye.
President Roten.
Yes.
Thank you. The motion carries 5-0.
Okay, item 7, Mr. Miller, do we have any items to be added?
We do not.
Okay.
Not today, we do not.
Thank you. Item 8, action agenda. 8A, adopt Western Municipal Water District's legislative policy platform and principles and the updated state and federal priorities for 2026.
All right, Mr. Hadley, it's all yours.
Awesome. Well, I will do my best to keep this brief since we went over this in ComGov this last month, but obviously bringing it forward to the board for final approval of our 2026 legislative priorities and legislative platform. Overview of the presentation real quick. We'll talk about the purpose and overview of the documents, our process for legislative engagement, and then review our 2026 top legislative priorities. What's the difference between our legislative platform and our legislative priorities? For the public's awareness, the platform is more of a foundational document for our legislative program and gives us the guidelines on how we interact and develop our legislative priorities, and is really a measure to try and include transparency for the public in understanding how we develop our positions for our legislative priorities. And then, of course, the priority documents provides clear direction for us as staff to move forward with what issues we can engage on behalf of Western's board and our customers. And of course, as we go through that process and update them, we incorporate legislative sessions, the prior sessions, what were those priorities last year, what's shifting in the future, and then what our associations are doing and what they're seeing in the future. Next slide. Our legislative platform is written in plain language and offers detailed descriptions of our legislative program. It serves as the basis for taking on high legislative priorities and is obviously the basis for taking our legislative actions. On the priorities documents, we separated them a few years ago into state and federal to kind of delineate the differences between those. Those are our supporting documents to the platform. And then with these documents, when they're passed, it gives staff the ability to take different positions on legislation on behalf of, again, the board and our customers that we serve. Our process. So as a reminder, our process is that our general manager approves all letters, including coalition letters, which we get a lot of those requests coming through to join on to different coalition letters to support or oppose legislation. The letters are addressed from the general manager. And then, of course, if anything comes up that's not brought on up, that's not specifically on our legislative platform, or is maybe something that may be deemed as controversial, we'll bring it back to the Community and Government Affairs Committee for direction on that. We look at the platform annually, but like this year, we don't necessarily make changes every year to the platform, but we do update the state and federal priorities every year because the landscape is always shifting, as you heard earlier today. So to wrap up, our top 2026 legislative priorities, and these are simplified versions of our legislative priorities that go between both our state and federal priorities. If you want the specific ones, they're in the documents that are attached to this item. But of course, as you can imagine, like our state lobby said this morning, implementation of SB 72 from last year is our top priority, making sure that continues to move forward and has momentum behind it. Water infrastructure funding and permit streamlining and modernization. One of the key parts of making sure that SB 72 works is that projects that are large and can make a dent in California water actually are able to get permitted and get funding as needed. So we want to make sure we're supporting those efforts. PFAS, and honestly, even broader than PFAS, water quality challenges. You never know what the next constituent of emerging concern could be. So we have that on our top list to make sure that both funding, infrastructure, and the fact that we're going through the legislative process, not the regulatory process, or sorry, flip that we're not using the legislative process to develop water quality standards, but rather are going through the scientifically based regulatory process. It's always a priority for us. March our reserve base, without going into too many details on that, We imagine that between the PFAS plume underneath the base as well as the rising groundwater issues, that is a top priority for our region for many reasons, but we want to make sure that we are a partner on those solutions between Eastern, ourselves, and the base on what those solutions look like. And of course, affordability, and that's a very general thrown around term, brought up a lot, but when it comes to water affordability, there's a few different aspects that we want to really dive into when we talk about legislative priorities and making sure that water agencies aren't on the hook for making sure that everyone is affordable relative to their own area. So there's a specific item on that, and it sounds like Aqua this year is moving forward with trying to make significant amendments to SB 350, which could end up being the pathway to developing a statewide low-income rate assistance program. So if that is the case, we want to make sure that we are supporting those efforts as a water industry. Not listed on this top legislative priorities issue, obviously there's a whole plethora of different issues that come up throughout the year. These are just the ones that we elevate to the top level because as a staff of one, plus our supporting lobbyists, we want to make sure that whatever comes up, we're prioritizing things. But things like conservation, those are always on our radar, and as those hearings come up at the State Water Board and as they're developing those regulations, we are absolutely making sure our voice is heard at the table. And making sure that our inland region is continuing to be advocated for because we get often overlooked when it comes to those types of standards and regulations. The last thing I'll touch on that also is not on our list is that we are exploring the idea of potentially amending nuisance laws to exempt wastewater treatment plants from nuisance laws if you meet certain requirements. This is going to be a major lift. We're talking with CASA around that, the California Association of Sanitation Agencies, on a potential bill, as well as maybe some potential regulatory amendments to lessen the burden on some wastewater treatment plants who are unfairly getting penalized by upset customers, as you all know very well, the issue of that. So it's probably not an issue coming up this year, but we are looking at that and exploring which other agencies, what other wastewater treatment plants are experiencing similar issues, what a proposal could look like. So that way, when this, in usually the late fall, early winter timeframe is when associations are requesting proposals, we'll have something developed by then. So keeping that top of mind as we move forward in the next legislative cycle. We do have that in our minds and may do something with that late this year, early next year. So with that, happy to take any questions. I know this is an annual presentation that's given. It may not be the most exciting, and I had to follow up on such a nice presentation and so much happiness happening, but legislation is also fun and exciting, and with that, I request your approval of our 2026 legislative priorities and our legislative platform.
Okay. Any comments or questions about the document? No? So I just want to say that I know you encapsulated that into a fairly short and brief presentation,
Yes.
but it's very obvious to me the time that goes into this document, and it's super important. So we are at ready when things come up, and I mean, obviously we can't predict every single situation,
right.
but for the majority of them, we are ready. And when I look at the red line edition, especially seeing even tiny things like maybe in this go around you spelled out an acronym that was in there, or
Sure.
you know, you changed one little word like I or it or a or whatever. I mean, it's gone. It's obvious that it's gone over with a fine-tooth comb, and that gives me a lot of confidence in the document and in where we stand on policy. So I just want to thank, because that has to be a Herculean, even to have the existing document and go over it each year, it has to be a Herculean task. I mean, it just is. So thank you, and much, much appreciated. And I actually find legislative updates fascinating. So, yeah.
Excellent.
So a lot of people like sports. No, I like this stuff. So thank you. With that, do we have a motion to?
I'll make a motion to approve.
Okay.
Second.
A motion and a second whenever, do we have public comment?
We do not.
Okay. Whenever you're ready for the vote, please.
Director Gardner.
Aye.
Director Torres.
Yes.
Director Dinstead.
Aye.
Director Risby.
Aye.
President Roten.
Yes.
Thank you. The motion carries 5-0.
Thank you all so much.
Okay, thank you. All right, item B, award a professional services contract to Water Systems Consulting Incorporated for the feasibility study for recharging recycled water and groundwater desalter expansion project.
A lot of words in that
I
one, huh?
see Mallory up there, but Mr.
So
Miller, do you
Mallory's
want
worried
the-
about our future water supply, so she wants to do a study looking
She
at how we
wants
can
to.
better maximize some of our local water capture.
Why
So,
not?
Mallory,
You got to
it's all
start with
yours.
the info. Thank you so much. Good morning, everyone, President Broughton, board members, and staff.
Good morning.
I'm here to request the recommendation to award a professional services contract to Water Systems Consulting, or WSC, to perform the feasibility study for recharging recycled water and groundwater desalter expansion in the Arlington groundwater basin. And we also do have Lane Carlson from WSC here. She is virtual, and she will be the project manager for this study, and she is the vice president and Southern California regional lead for WSC. A little background on Arlington Basin. It is a sub-basin of the upper Santa Ana Valley Basin, and Western acts as the Groundwater Sustainability Agency, the GSA, under SGMA, the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act. So we're responsible for the sustainable groundwater management of this basin, and so we produced a groundwater sustainability plan in 2022. We have to do annual reporting to ensure we're meeting the goals of that plan. But the basin has faced issues with groundwater quality, including elevated nitrates and perchlorates, so leading back to some of that historic agricultural activities. But the current efforts, including the Arlington Desalter and the Arlington Recharge Basin, which currently captures stormwater to aid in the sustainability of the basin. But we really need to explore other ways to have more consistent recharge in the Victoria Recharge Basin so that we can ensure sustainability for the long term. And, the Arlington Basin is really a critical groundwater source in our service area. The desalter alone provides 60% of the city of Norco's supply and supplements water for the cities of Corona and Riverside. But the challenge is that the basin has been under historic stress. During the drought of 2012 through 2016, the pumping increased by over 50% compared to the historic averages for that time in order to meet demand. And this increased usage has persisted, which created some uncertainty about the basin's long-term sustainability without looking into another source of recharge, which is what we're aiming to do with this study. More about the study goals. To combat some of this uncertainty that we're seeing, we want to focus on 3 parts over the next 18 to 24 months with this study. We want to identify source identification. So we want to evaluate sources of recycled water recharge to augment the basin. We also want to have a regulatory roadmap, which will scope out all of the regulatory steps that are required for recharge. As you may know, there's many steps involved with permitting and reporting and monitoring that are required in order to recharge recycled water into the basin. So we want a roadmap to lay all that out for us so we know what exact steps need to be taken to do so. And finally, desalter evaluation. We want to evaluate the long-term demands of the desalter itself, whether expansion, additional treatment, additional wells, conveyance systems, et cetera. So the scope of work for this study will be over 4 tasks. Project management will be the first task, which is your, leading the coordination, generating detailed documentations that are required for our grant reporting, which we'll get into a little bit later. The second one is really important. It's stakeholder engagement, and this is where WSC really thrives and has done a great job in facilitating, meetings and prioritizing what our expansion strategy would be and preparing decision-making materials. They really have done a lot of this in their past work, and in other times we've worked with them, and this is a big highlight for them. An indirect potable reuse evaluation. So this task identifies the gaps and the regulatory requirements that are going to be needed for that roadmap I was talking about earlier. And finally, the feasibility study. They will develop the comprehensive USBR, Bureau of Reclamation compliance study that'll analyze the supply, demand, alternatives, and environmental impacts. So our recommended consultant is WSC. Going back in September 25, we solicited proposals and we received 3 responsive bids from Hotch Consulting, Woodard & Curran, and WSC. And they were evaluated, the proposals were evaluated on their technical approach, their experience, their understanding of the work, and the level of effort and cost. And so the selection committee unanimously recommends WSC, and they stood out because they are really strong in their federal compliance. This study is 50% funded federally through the USBR grant opportunity, and WSC has extensive experience in USBR compliant feasibility studies. In fact, one of their studies is on the website as a model example of these studies. And they have specific expertise. Their team includes Lane Carlson, who's on the line today, and Michael Cruikshank, who bring strong technical abilities to groundwater hydrogeology. And finally, their local knowledge. Their proposal demonstrated a deep institutional understanding and knowledge of the Arlington Basin and the history of the desalter, which minimizes the learning curve when you're bringing on a consultant for these types of studies. And they know the agency and the watershed players, which will be a really huge value for us when we're looking into the other possible sources, evaluating them, and hopefully leading to an eventual partnership with other agencies. So the schedule and budget, if approved, today we will plan to kick off next month in February and expect to have an analysis of all the alternatives, all the different sources that could be possible by February of 2027, with a final study submitted by August of 2027. And so their total contract would be in the amount of just under $400,000, $399,254. And we secured a grant which will reimburse 50% of the cost, so $200,000, which brings Western portion to $200,000, which is covered by the Water Resources Special Studies budget. And with that, I can take any questions you may have.
Right. Any questions? Oh.
Sure.
Question. Can you go back to the last slide?
Yes.
So I think it's good on occasion to educate folks. Why such a long timeline?
I wondered that.
Yeah. Well, there's all of the tasks that I was going back to, which I'll go back to if I could, these tasks here. All of those require getting together a lot of data. So that'll be a few months of getting together all of the data we have to be able to supply to the consultant to look through, start to compile. And that stakeholder engagement one that I was talking about, that takes time to get together with different groups here at Western. We're going to be meeting with operations, engineering, multiple teams for multiple times to really make sure whatever is being proposed and looked into is everyone is on the same page and wants to move forward with those same things. And, the task 3 and 4, putting all the study together. They really have to analyze what particular projects could be, have to come together to select them and, move forward to a compliance study. So many months.
I just want to add, this is actually a very short timeline for these types of studies, but it feels like a long time.
No, and that, because that was the basis of my next question.
Right.
My next question was going to be, can we meet the timeline that we've put forward? Because again, part of what we do is to educate folks that may be listening or interested. Why do we spend this amount of money? Why does it take so long to do these things? And I think people need to understand sometimes the scope and the gravity of what we do, and understand the full complexity of it. So, because it's not just an easy thing, and you're not just looking at a computer pulling data off of something. You're doing extensive things, and that's why I asked the question.
Sure,
So, so I just want to make sure too that we're able to meet the timeline.
Yes.
Because obviously, and is there a grant deadline for the tasks to be completed? Do we have to fall within a certain timeframe?
There is, and we are actually working on a little bit of an extension as well, because it took us some time to make sure everybody was on the same page about where we wanted to go with the study, all the objectives and the goals. So we are pursuing a timeline extension for that. And so we've talked with WSC about that, and they have discussed that this would be within that timeline extension.
And is there any comment from WSC that, if they're on
Lane?
with us?
Yeah, good morning, Lane Carlson. I do believe that this is a reasonable timeline, and as Mallory mentioned, the stakeholder engagement, both internal stakeholders at Western, different departments, and particularly the external engagement is really where we're going to spend a lot of time making sure that we have the right concepts on the table, and there are multiple steps, multiple workshops to go through, so that there's broad-based support when you get to the end and that there's confidence moving forward. So I do think that this is a reasonable schedule. The one thing that really is out of our control and out of Western's control as well is the external stakeholders. And so it could be that if we need information from them, or we need multiple meetings with them, of course we need to respect their time and their priorities. So we start early coordination with them. We give them a heads up. We really try to foster that partnership, and in hopes that they're willing and able to come along this schedule with us. So all that said, I do believe we've allowed reasonable time for that in the schedule. And just, by early and frequent communication with them, I'm optimistic that, that even those things that are outside of our control will fall into line with this schedule.
Great. No, and I appreciate that. And again, the nature of my question is just to make sure that we're all on the same page and we are fully transparent in all of our efforts. Because when you get somebody that just pops into a meeting one time and looks at something, they get a little taken back, like, why are you spending so money? Why does it take so long? And people really need to understand the engagement that you guys and the value that you put forward with doing all of these things, and how in-depth you go to make sure that we're getting it right. And that we're spending the appropriate amount of time to do exactly that. So thank you. And with that, that's the conclusion of my questions, and I'm happy to make a motion to approve.
Second,
Okay.
to approve.
We have a motion and a second. Were there any other comments? Director Gardner?
Just a quick comment, maybe a little clarification. I was glad to hear that we are looking specifically in stakeholder engagement at external people. As everybody is likely to recall, we had some issues over well 6, which I think were ultimately resolved, but there were some questions and some suggestions that we maybe didn't have the right to do what we were doing. And there are other users in that basin and people who can use that basin. It's in RPU's service area, and so we'll need to coordinate carefully with them. So I'm glad that we have that focus, and I'm optimistic that any questions about, is this the right thing to do, or do we have a right to do anything like this, will get answered during the course of this study and not come up when we're actually trying to approve constructing a project, if that comes out of this study. So I'm glad to see us do it and looking forward to it.
Thank you.
Okay. We had a motion and a second. Did we have any public comment?
We do not.
All right. I think we're ready for the vote.
Director Gardner.
Aye.
Director Torres.
Yes.
Director Dinstedt.
Aye.
Director Risby. President Roten.
Yes.
Thank you. The motion carries 5-0.
Thank you. Item 8C, receive and file the fiscal 2024-2025 annual comprehensive financial report to Western Municipal Water District.
Thank you very much. I'm going to turn this over to Rick so he can do the introduction.
Well, good morning, President Roten and members of the board. I am very happy to be able to present to you our yearly cornerstone achievement for the Finance Department, what we call the ACFR, the Annual Comprehensive Financial Report, for this last fiscal year that ended last June. The report is a foundational piece to Western for maintaining trust and transparent communication to the community, and really an essential piece for our investors who put their money in our infrastructure by buying our bonds. As we've previously reported on the financial results, I'm not going to be going over numbers, but I did want to highlight a couple of things about the report itself. The first is that the ACFR was completed a whole month earlier than last year. This is a significant achievement for the accounting team, many of whom are either new to their positions or new to Western here in the last few years, and all with the new accounting software that was recently implemented. Lin Shi, who was recently promoted accounting supervisor over that area, did an amazing job leading the team and coordinating it. I would have her stand up, but she just happens to be on vacation. That was conveniently timed right after the audit. I can't imagine why. But I will point out the amazing team of accountants in the back row who I think are hiding out back there. But they're the core team that did all the heavy lifting making this possible. And just the second thing to highlight on the report itself, since it is lengthy and you may want to focus on different areas depending on what you're looking for. You have a few major sections. One I think is the most interesting is the intro section right up front. That's why it goes up front, which is really a story of who Western is, who we serve, what are our water resources, what are our projects, what did we accomplish in the last year. It's everything about Western overall. Then you go into what's called the management's discussion analysis, which is all about how did we do this year versus last year, pointing out key differences. Then you have the financial statements themselves, which are the official document, which is how did that year go? How much resources did we have? How much did we earn? What were our liabilities? That's the part that's officially audited, that our auditor comments on and gives their opinion on. And then lastly, which I think is also useful, the statistical section, which is really the long-term trends of the district. Things like how much did we, over the last 10 years, how much water did we solve 10 years ago versus today? What were our rates 10 years ago versus today? Trends over time on key financial metrics. With that, I'll turn it over to Daphne Munoz, who is here. She's our principal auditor with CLA to go over the results of the audit. Thank you, Daphne.
Good morning, Madam President, members of the board. I'm Daphne Munoz, the principal at Clifton Larson Allen, and I'm here today to present to you the results of our audit for fiscal year ended June 30, 2025. I'm going to cover 4 topics. I'll go over the scope of our services. I'll go over our auditor's opinion, our report on internal control over financial reporting, and lastly, the communication with those charged with governance. So for our scope of services, we were engaged to perform an audit of the financial statements for the year ended June 30, 2025 in accordance with generally accepted auditing standards as well as government auditing standards. We were also engaged to perform a single audit of the federal expenditures under the uniform guidance, and this is currently in process. And we were also engaged to issue negative assurance reports for the bond issuance and the note issuance. So included in this booklet under the financial section, the very first 3 pages, I believe it's 4 now, it's getting longer and longer, is our opinion. The first 2 paragraphs talks about the opinion and also the period that is covered by our audit. So for this audit, the period that is covered is for July 1st, 2024 through June 30, 2025. We have issued what we call an unmodified opinion for the year ended June 30, 2025, and that is really the highest audit opinion that any auditee can get. That means it was a clean opinion. We didn't have to modify anything on the financial statements that was prepared by the management. Again, the management is responsible for the presentation and fair preparation of the financial statements, as well as adopting sound internal controls over financial reporting. Our responsibilities as auditors is to express an opinion on whether the financial statements are presented in all material respects in accordance with GAAP. We have obtained reasonable assurance that the financial statements are free of material misstatements. Assurance not absolute, because we did not test 100% of the transactions that happened during the year. Therefore, we are not able to provide an absolute assurance that there are no material misstatements, that there are no misstatements in the financial statements. And we perform our audit in accordance with generally accepted auditing standards and government auditing standards, and that requires certain review of compliance with policies and internal controls. So as part of our audit, we considered the district's internal control over financial reporting to determine whether our audit procedures are appropriate for the purpose of expressing our opinion on the financial statements. However, we do not issue an opinion on the internal control itself. However, though, if something comes to our attention that we think merits if we found any findings and recommendations, it will be included in this report. I'm glad to report that we did not have any findings to report as part of this, as part of our report on internal controls. And lastly, our professional standards require us to communicate certain information to those charged with governance. First is the planned scope and timing of our audit was communicated during our planning meeting, and also we did a presentation back in May to the Finance Committee regarding our scope and timing. Management is responsible for the selection and use of appropriate accounting policies, and these policies are included and described in Note 1 to the financial statements. Current year policies were consistent with last year, with the exception of the way compensated absences is recorded, because the district is required to implement Government Accounting Standards Board Statement Number 101, which changed the way compensated absences are valued. The financial statements includes significant estimates for which actual results could vary from what's included in the financial statements. Just to highlight a couple of those estimates is the annual required contribution, pension expense, and net pension liability with regards to the district's pension plan. Those estimates are based on actuarial reports that were provided by the actuary hired by CalPERS. And the OPEB for the actuarially determined contributions, OPEB expense, and net OPEB liability are based on actuarial evaluations performed by actuaries that were hired by the district. We did not have any difficulties during our audit. We did not have any disagreements with management during the course of our audit, and to our knowledge, management did not consult with other accountants regarding auditing or accounting matters. And that concludes my presentation. I'll be glad to answer any questions.
Are there any questions?
Not a question, but
Director?
our customers expect us to be honest and to handle financial matters well. The board expects Craig to see that that happens. Craig expects Rick to see that that happens. Rick expects the team to see that it happens, and you all did. I mean, this is the dream audit that you have. No disagreements, no questions, no findings. So congratulations and thank you to all of you.
All right. Do we have any public comments?
We do not.
Okay. I think,
So
are
moved.
we ready for a motion? Director Torres?
Second.
Whenever you're ready for the vote.
Director Gardner.
Aye.
Director Torres.
Yes.
Director Dinstedt.
Aye.
Director Rizvi.
Aye.
President Roten.
Yes.
Thank you. The motion carries
you.
5-0.
Thank you.
Okay, we will move on to item 8D, confirm Western Municipal Water District's representatives to outside organizations receive and file board director committee appointments. Mr. Miller.
Last board meeting, we asked the board to provide any suggested changes they may have to last year's matrix, to either myself or the board president. So I think we got a simultaneous request to me and the board president
Yes.
for one modification to CDA. Other than that,
Correct.
I've heard nothing else, so I'll turn it back over
Okay.
to you, President Roten.
And that's the only one that I heard from, although it's not too late to raise any of those things here.
What was the change?
For CDA, Director Gardner is going to be the representative, and then I'll be the alternate. So we're basically switching positions. And the main reason behind that is because I didn't feel like doing it. No, I'm kidding. Totally joking. There is a little bit of crossover between Chino Basin Water Master and CDA, but this coming year, it's looking like there may be more, even more so crossover because of a couple issues that are going to be coming forward. So I think it made great sense to do that if Director Gardner was willing, and he seemed to be. So I can be there in a pinch if you need the alternate, but that was the only change that I saw on the chart. Oh, and I did have one question. We have that ad hoc committee, and maybe those don't go on here, but for the LAFCO boundary changes, does that need to be on here?
No, these are reoccurring
Okay.
committees. That's, it's very different.
Okay.
So that's an ad hoc, we don't know if it'll continue or temporary. It doesn't
Okay.
meet regularly, so
Okay.
it doesn't rise to the level of the matrix.
Okay, that was my only question. Then with that, I would make the motion to confirm the draft with that one change for CDA.
I'll second.
Okay? And comment? Did you have a comment? Yeah, I made the motion. Okay. I think, oh, any public comments?
We do not.
Okay. I think we're ready to vote.
Director Gardner.
Aye.
Director Torres.
Yes.
Director Dinstedt.
Aye.
Director Rizvi.
Yes.
President Roten.
Yes.
Thank you. The motion carries 5-0.
Okay, item E, appoint Western Municipal Water District representative to the Board of Directors of the Metropolitan Water District of Southern California.
So we require a vote separately on the appointment to the Met representative. So our staff's recommendation is we continue with our current Met representative, and that's all I've got to add unless there's questions.
Okay.
Make the motion.
Okay, we have a motion. And Director Torres, did you say second?
Yes.
Okay. So we're, any public comment?
No public comment.
Okay. I think
Direct-
we're ready.
Director Gardner. Director Torres.
Yes.
Director Rizvi.
Aye.
Director Dinstedt.
Aye.
President Roten.
Yes.
Thank you. The motion carries 5-0.
President Roden, I just want to highlight one other thing. A couple of our appointments on our matrix require a resolution from the board. It doesn't require a separate vote. So
Okay.
next month, we'll come back with
Those-
RCRA and SAPA
Okay.
for resolutions, just so you don't wonder what's happening if you see it back on the agenda again next month.
Okay. All right. Appreciate that. Heads up. We will move into our reports, General Counsel report. Mr. Ballinger?
Yes, I just wanted to give you an update. At the last board meeting, the board asked that we bring back a discussion and action for the board to talk about teleconferencing, and I plan on bringing that back on February 4th, so just to let you know.
How exciting.
February 4th. Okay, thank you so much. And Mr. General Manager?
Okay, I've got just a few things. So PFAS, you hear a lot about PFAS. We worry about PFAS a lot. Most of the time we think about it in the context of water. We don't think about it in the context of wastewater as much here at the board level. Our staff certainly does. I certainly do, because there will be regulations on PFAS in waste discharge, whether it's liquid waste in recycled water that you're putting back into the Santa Ana River, or that we're using in purple pipe irrigation like we do here at this office, or whether it's in the solids that are separated from the liquids in the plant, and then the disposal of those solids contain PFAS. And so what do you do with those solids? So I fully anticipate at some point we will have regulations on how to do that and what levels you can discharge those materials in. Well, we want to get in front of that. And one of the challenges that we see coming is this fabulous brine line that our watershed has, which is so great to get salts out of the upper watershed and get them out to the ocean. Well, you'll recall that the same treatment process that gets the salts out also gets PFAS out. So when we turn on our desalters and everyone else turns on their desalters in the watershed, it strips out PFAS, puts them into the brine. The brine then is discharged to Orange County Sanitation District. So we have to be really collaborative with Orange County Sanitation District as to what they do with those brines and what they make us do from like an internal regulatory process. So there's been numerous conversations at SAPA. SAPA is the manager of the brine line. We're all struggling with some of the compliance issues on PFAS with the brine line and what may be anticipated at some point. So we're trying to take a very proactive stance with Orange County Sanitation District and really work with them on how do we do this, because the brine line is specifically created to move concentrated brines out of the upper watershed down to Orange County Sand and discharge to the ocean. That was its purpose. And if all of a sudden we start getting regulations on PFAS inputs into the brine line in the upper watershed and in Orange County also, does that change the whole fabulous benefit that we get out of the brine line? So we want to be really careful that we don't get kind of regulated out of the brine line business, because that brine line is so valuable to the water quality of the watershed. So in that spirit, that's a long lead-in to a couple of meetings, but I met with John Withers. He's board member at IRWD. He's the past chair of the board at Orange County Sanitation District. And Ryan Gallagher, who is the current chair of the Orange County Sanitation District, to talk to them about the philosophy of PFAS. And it was a great meeting. They fully understand, John Withers especially has been around forever. Don't take that the wrong way, John, if you're listening. But he knows the value of the brine line. And, he says things like, no, this is a fabulous partnership between the upper and the lower watershed. We need to make sure that we protect that. Ryan Gallagher is the same way. So great meeting. They're very much on board with preserving our ability to proactively use the brine line. So that was great. Cut to the next week, we met with the general manager at Orange County Sanitation District, Rob Thompson, to kind of ask them in a lot greater detail who was there. The meeting, it was all the SAPA GMs, and including the SAPA GM and the GM from Orange County Sanitation District. We did this down in Orange County, so we could really express our concerns about future regulations and kind of commit to a collaborative partnership to address the problem. And the engineers get together and like, well, where's the best place to solve this problem? It's probably at Orange County Sanitation District. And then they, of course, say, well, wait a minute, if we're funding all this treatment, who's paying us? Because we shouldn't have to pay for your mitigation. And we said, no, you're right. The great news is that Rob went into great detail about a pilot program that Orange County Sanitation District is doing that destroys PFAS in solids. And so it's kind of this, kind of cutting edge, high pressure, high temperature kind of explosion of PFAS chains. And so they're testing it right now with a firm in Florida. He's been invited to come to SAPA to do a presentation, and I think on the 17th of February, maybe we'll get you the date. And he's going to kind of lay out what he laid out to us, and we'll be inviting our wastewater treatment staff. But it's a huge issue. We're way ahead of the curve, but the last thing we don't want to see is a regulation coming from the state board or the regional board that impedes our ability to use our desalters. And the regional board, oh, by the way, I think is very supportive of it also. They'll be brought into the planning and the discussion of how we use this. So just trying to stay way out in front of regulations on that one. So that was a good thing. Director Gardner and myself and Ryan and Tim met with Jeff Ballinger and Jim Markman on legal issues in the Chino Basin at Watermaster. This is something that we have agreed to do to make sure that we're staying up to date on very complex legal issues at Watermaster. So nothing in particular, but we had agreed that we should do this on a regular basis so there are no surprises down the road, and we know what our attorneys are hearing and what our staff's hearing, and it's a good idea to collaborate, so we're doing that. I've been working hard at CMUA as the board president with Danielle and the other exec committee members to modify the bylaws at CMUA. There's some really outdated bylaws. So we're working hard on those. Those are going to come back next week. We have CMUA Ledge Day on Monday, and then we have a CMUA board meeting on Tuesday that I'll stay up there for. So we're trying to modify those. So lots of effort. Sometimes I think our bylaws are complicated for Western, and you look at CMUA's, and I'm not smart enough to figure out what was in there. So we're changing those so they're understandable for me. Next one, we have started the budget process. So that'll be coming to the board in a couple of months, but Rick kicked it off yesterday, so we're meeting individually with all the groups. I set a target for the budget that allows for some growth because of inflation, and everyone submits their numbers, and then we debate about those numbers. But we're trying to hold the line on our costs, which is important for our financial stewardship for our customers. It's not a Christmas list. It is what is necessary to meet our service objectives. And it's very difficult because, as you all know, that inflation's one thing. There's generally about a 3% inflationary rate, but some of our things are growing much faster than that. And so that is really a challenge in how we're going to hold the cost line on that. Last two things, scheduling updates. SAPA 50th anniversary celebration is tomorrow at Crestmore Manor, so hopefully you'll be there for that. And then we're looking forward to our retail agency roundtable in here on January 29th, and Shivaji Deshmukh, the new general manager at Metropolitan, is going to be our guest speaker. Happy to answer any questions. That concludes my updates.
Any questions? I don't see any. Okay, thank you for that report. Sorry, I was writing down the roundtable. I'm sure I have it on my calendar, but just in case. We'll move into item C, director comments and requests. SAPA.
Well, Craig just stole my thunder, so.
Oh.
man.
That's okay. But in case anybody didn't hear, SAPA's 50th anniversary celebration is tomorrow at Crestmore Manor.
Okay.
SAPA did meet yesterday. It was a pretty routine meeting. The one new thing is, I think most of you are aware, there were some conflicts between the management style conflicts between the former SAPA general manager and staff members. The new general manager is taking a significantly different tack with staff and is trying to be much more Craig-like and inclusive of staff and respectful of staff and appreciative of staff. And so SAPA has now initiated a Employee of the Year program, and the first award was yesterday. It went to Haley Gohari, who has been there for about 7 years now. A very smart, hardworking employee, and has done much for SAPA and grown a great deal in her knowledge and capabilities in the time she's been there. So that will continue. She got a plaque that she takes home, and then there's one that goes on the wall, and then there's a perpetual one that future employees of the year will have their name engraved on a small sub-plaque on it that will also hang on the wall. So that's, yeah, it's, I think things are really turning around at SAPA in staff morale and people's interest in remaining at SAPA and working hard and growing in their jobs. So that's a plus. Then a couple of smaller administrative things. And that was it.
Okay, thank you. Metropolitan.
So Metropolitan, we had the pleasure of welcoming our very closely worked with colleague, Phil Pauley. He has now joined the board, so excited to have Phil there, and we're going to teamwork him up. And I filled his dance card while he was up there this week, so we'll have some good conversations with Phil coming up in the future. And then one of the big contract awards that was done was the Sepulveda feeder, Reach 2. You know, I had some entertaining conversations about this, of what the significance was for doing this replacement, because it's a huge dollar amount. It's almost $62 million. And I was told that if this was a pipe failure, that not only would it launch a car, but it could be very devastating to neighborhoods and things of that nature, because there's some problems with that, and their wanting to do some fixing on it. So significant conversations about that and what was the need and how it was explained was very interesting. And then one of the other interesting things that came up at the board meeting, we had 2 guest speakers that came, and something that is of great interest to us, you know, there's conversations going on about pure water, the cost of pure water, what are the benefits, some of the outlying things that are going on with pure water. And this is a big discussion, you know, the EIRs that are coming forward, the continuing to fund it, push money for it on a project that hasn't been fully approved by the board yet, and moving on some things. So principles, the proposed principles to guide Metropolitan along with partner agencies and what those look like. And 2 interesting things that happened were the speakers that showed up that came from Southern Nevada and from Arizona to talk about this project and their partnering on this project. And for the first time, I got to hear straight from the horse's mouth that they are all in on this project and they're willing to put money towards this project, and the fact that for them, this is the cheap option, which I thought was very interesting, you know, and there's conversations about them funding this project and then doing a trade for Mead water so that the exchange would be done. So they would be benefiting this and they would take water out of Lake Mead. So it was an interesting that, you know, they came and did this very lengthy presentation about their involvement, their all in, how they're moving it through their prospective agencies to come to Metropolitan, how they're willing to sign all of these agreements, and they've been, you know, fully engaged in this process. So just sharing the info. That's all I'm doing, sharing the info.
Brenda, did they mention, or has there been discussion of whether they would contribute to operating costs?
You know, that's been the interesting discussion, is where is it, what is their level of commitment? What are they going to do? Are they just going to pay for the project, or are they going to continue to do this? And I guess that's more to come, right? They talk about the principles and they talk about this, and then what does it ultimately look like at the back end? Because that is ultimately the concern. You can't come in here and pay for a project and then shift all the rest of the burden. So.
Well, an uneconomic burden.
Right.
Pure water's, it can be a good project, but it's expensive to build and it's expensive to operate.
Absolutely.
If somebody's willing to pick up those costs, maybe it's a great idea.
Well, and that's kind of, I think what the question is, are they willing to foot the bill fully?
Yeah.
And to see what kind of percentage they're coming in with and how those discussions are going to move forward. So that is the question, and that'll be the debate over next several months to figure out where do we go, what kind of dollars we're looking at, and who's writing the big checks.
Thanks.
And then one of the things that I've never seen in all of the years I've been sitting here, and one of the things that happened, I found out in Met's history for the very first time, was we were asked for a limited waiver of the Brown Act of a closed session issue that nobody could talk about and had to be done in open session. So it was kind of like, we need this waiver. And then we couldn't ask questions, we couldn't talk about it, and it was definitely what my kid would say was awkward turtle moment, because you kind of flip the turtle over on the back and then try to figure out how you're going to upright the turtle without actually touching the turtle. Yeah, it was weird. Ultimately, it was approved, and that investigation will go forward under a limited scope, under something. So it's very interesting, and I think ultimately, when this is all concluded, if we'll see if it comes to a presentation or not in open session. So we'll see. But it was just interesting how we're being asked to make a vote on something and make a decision on something we couldn't talk about.
In open session?
Yes.
What was the item?
A secret.
The item was to vote in open session, because we couldn't go into closed session and even have a discussion about it. So was to approve a limited waiver of the Brown Act over closed session privilege and a comment that was made in closed session.
That was the vote.
But we couldn't talk about what,
Okay.
correct, to waive, to grant the waiver
Okay.
for an investigation to be performed over a comment that was made in closed session that we couldn't talk about.
Got it.
So.
And it was approved.
And it was
The
approved.
waiver.
The waiver was approved. Ultimately, it was approved. Because of course, everything gets talked about in committee, and then it gets all moved to the board, which ends up turning into a different discussion, because then you could have more participants with that, because there's more board members that show up rather than at committee. So it was a very awkward turtle moment to talk about something in open session that we couldn't talk about, and we couldn't ask questions about.
Interesting.
Yeah, it really was. So, and my understanding was that was the first time in Met's history to ever do something like that. So, and my concern was, we have to be careful we don't set precedents on something like this, because closed session, and many of you, we do closed session. We've got closed session here today. So sometimes we need to have the flexibility to make those comments in closed session and have open and frank discussion. And, that needs to be treated a certain way. Right? So it was very awkward. It was very awkward. So I just bring that up and hope that I never have to do it again. And I hope we never are challenged with having to do something like that here at this board, because it was just awkward. And
So the waiver was approved, but you still can't tell us what it was.
correct.
Well, because I'm
What was
assuming
the
in the
waiver?
meeting that you guys didn't talk about what it was for. It
No.
just was the waiver.
Correct.
Okay, right.
Yeah.
That,
So
that's what I was asking too, Laura. I'm like, well, what
Yeah.
was the waiver for? But they didn't obviously mention that.
yeah.
Couldn't
So
discuss it. It was just the waiver.
exactly. So
But you knew then what the waiver was for? Or didn't? I want to be.
I know that
I'm so
again.
curious.
That's the essence of the confusion. So,
I'm gonna watch the
but
video now.
in any case, that's where we were at. And then obviously we've got the MODOC dinner coming up next Monday. That will be, Met directors are all asked to attend. I will be attending on behalf of Met. I've been asked to do that. So if it frees up a seat for anybody to go from Western at our table at Western, I'm happy to give my seat up, because I'll be sitting with Met. And that is all I have for Metropolitan this week.
Okay. I feel like that could be a show this week
At
Metro.
Met, that's right. Stay tuned, more to come.
Director Gardner, Chino Basin?
Chino Basin Water Master meets tomorrow.
Oh, that's right. Okay. Tomorrow. Okay, and CDA, I did attend the meeting on January 6th. I always appreciate staff's information that they give me ahead of time, 'cause there's a lot of technical stuff in CDA. And there happened to be 9, 10, wait, might have been more, 11 action items on the agenda. So I appreciate that. They're mainly contracts for, like, there's a Chino 1 and 2 desalter and water softener project, inspection for that project, purchase of an anti-scalient, I'm not saying that right, scalant. I'm putting an extra I in it. Pump skids for Chino 2. We rejected the bids for Chino 1 and 2 coating projects, and that was because despite reminders at all, none of the applicants, or none of the 4 bidders provided the required bid bond in accordance with the notice. Yeah, I thought that was kind of interesting.
That's interesting.
And there was an amendment to a contract and purchase of spare RO interstage pump and motor for Chino 2. And then we did have election of officers, which we decided to keep the same. which is Director Rogers is chair from Chino Hills. He does a great job, and Director Newton is vice chair from Norco, and he's very comfortable staying as vice. He didn't have, a big yearning to become the chair. And had we rotated, I guess I would have started rotating into that as vice, and Director Newton would have been chair, but didn't know it at the time, but I think it worked out even better doing it this way. So, and that board runs on a pretty even keel, and people have been on it, some of them a while, and so I think it seems to function really well. And then as far as the JPIA, oh no, I'm sorry, I skipped one. CDA board committee appointment, which is the Finance Committee, is the only standing committee, and that's going to remain the same, Chino Hills, and JCSD. And for Aqua, JPIA is going to remain Director Burton from Chino, and he did that last year. I don't know if he did it the year before, because he's kind of new on there. And then we had a very brief Brown Act update from the attorney, which was basically giving us a printed copy, and she reminded us that it's, and I'll remind all of you, it's Form 700 season. And then just a couple other staff reports, but I don't think that there was, the thing of noted significance that I heard is one of their wells, as far as PFAS testing, went above the 3.0 level, and so they need to notify, and although he didn't go into what that meant, who they notify, and they're going to need to do wellhead treatment on that particular well. And the next meeting is February 6th. So that was it. So that was a pretty full meeting for CDA. So, and now I just lost my agenda. Oh, here we go. RCRA.
And the meeting is tomorrow.
Okay. And WRCOG.
Yes, WRCOG. So we did not have technically an executive committee meeting this month. It was dark. However, we did have our review and goal-setting session and strategic plan overview, and did a couple of things with that. I'm very pleased that we had at least 18, I believe it was the number of executive committee members, alternates that participated in that. So I think it's been one of the largest turnouts that we've had at this session to talk about some basics, some fundamentals, and if we need to go back to the drawing board on a couple of things. And one of the things that we talked about and definitely had to be done was there was an amendment to the bylaws. Legal counsel had assessed a couple of things, and we needed to put and place in the bylaws a change with the clarification of the deputy executive director's authority and his ability to be able to sign for financial matters and clear checks to pay bills and a variety of different things. So that was discussed. We went ahead and adopted that resolution. Why is that significant? Because that ratification will actually conclude at General Assembly. So you'll all be voting on that come General Assembly when we put that forward as an amendment to the bylaws. And then we talked.
Allow him to act now?
Yes. Yes, it does. So we talked about the strategic plan and did an overview of what that strategic plan looked like for 2025. We're still on point with a lot of different things we still have until next year. And then it'll be our big 5-year overlook of what the next 5 years looks like. So we'll do a more in-depth next year regarding our strategic plan and what goals we have in mind and what our platforms are in a variety of different things. We reviewed the General Assembly and did an update on that. We kind of did a debrief of what last year's General Assembly was, looking at some dollar amounts and things. And then I went ahead and I stood up a ad hoc committee, which is at the pleasure of the chair in talking with my vice chairs. We haven't had this committee in place for a couple of years. And I really think it's important as we move forward that that ad hoc committee be a little bit more involved with our finances, the program, to take feedback from the previous year, and that it's not all placed, the burden is not all placed on staff to make some of these outlying decisions. And looking at what our overall costs were, costs continue to go up, but we've not changed ticket prices, we don't change agency commitments, we don't change any of this. And so really, it's to fundamentally look at, and some of the charting, and I probably should have asked Chris to provide me with some of the charting, but to track, they put it on a scale, and Director Torres would have loved this, to see these charts and these spreadsheets, to look at what our ticket costs are, but what our per person costs for. So I think our per person cost ticket is like $150, but the actual cost of the event all in is like $400 a person. Wow. And so we're not keeping track with what our actual costs are. So what we needed to do is take a fundamental look and changing up some things. Like one of the things that we found out, it's the VIP reception and things, is when we circulate hors d'oeuvres, what the cost is for that versus putting something on a table to just let people go for it instead. I mean, it's a significant cost, Yeah, wow. It was a huge dollar amount. And again, I think it was a great eye-opener for the executive committee to understand this is kind of our signature event. Mm-hmm. But we really need to be mindful of how we're spending our money, some of the entertainment cost factors versus what we really need to do and what General Assembly was really meant to be, because it's in our bylaws. We have to get the entire group together, which means all of us have to be there to vote on the bylaws, as well as all the cities need to be there to vote on it. That's why we all have to submit Form 700s for that, right? So it was an eye-opener for a lot of us. And then to look at escalating costs for some of our keynote speakers and what that meant, what we're looking at, and some of the contractual obligations that we have, because we're trying to, do multi-year contracts with the venue in order to receive a bigger discount because we're doing multiple years. So, simple things like that were discussed. And then we talked about the new office space, so the building that was done, the TIs that need to take place with that, some of the leasing agreements for some of the office space that goes with that, whether or not we want to bring in a management company to try to keep those in play, and making some different lines of discussion and what those cost factors look at versus the revenue that we would make from those kind of agreements. So we had some discussion about that. The Advocacy Ad Hoc Committee activities were discussed, so, legislative platforms, all of the cities, including us. So I would expect that Michael is going to send over what our legislative adopted priorities are over to that, so that there can be some review and some discussion, because obviously WRCOG wants to have that level of discussion, and if we want to send support letters, with all of our logos on it, that happen at that, we could send it up to Sacramento and then advocate along with our cities and the water districts, the Board of Education, what our legislative importances are going to be for this coming year too. And then we talked about doing some potential personnel policy updates, though, everything needs to be refreshed at times, and some of the bylaws needed to be looked at and refreshed. So I thought the best way to do this, including having conversations with my vice chairs on the leadership side, I stood up a policy committee. So there's going to be an in-depth discussion over policies and what needs to be changed so that we're in compliance with new regulations, laws that are in place, to make sure that we're keeping pace with changes and what current practices are and best practices are. So I've stood that group up. They've already had their first meeting, and they'll be making some headway on that. So we look forward to being able, hopefully, to include in this next General Assembly any revisions to the bylaws that are suggested to bring forward, along with policy changes for personnel, HR practices, good financial practices, those things. So more to come on those types of updates. And then we did have our financial transparency update, where we released the audit for this year results, along with some other transparency issues and some, cost factors, what TUMF looks like, and revenues were down a little bit this year with TUMF, and those types of things. So I think it was very productive. I think there was a lot of great dialogue. I was very pleased with the people because I asked for volunteers rather than appointing people to these committees because, you know, when you look at General Assembly and you look at doing policy stuff, that takes some time and some commitment on folks. And it adds the burden to that. But I thought it was better to have smaller discussions with smaller groups and then move that out with their recommendations to the larger groups to do the adoption. Thankfully, my vice chairs and the group agreed with me that those were good ideas. Jackie Casillas, who is sitting as the mayor of Corona, or the representative from Corona this year, is the first vice chair. It's anticipated that she is going to be stepping in and being the chair come General Assembly and the turnover of that. And so she believes wholeheartedly that these are good changes, and she intends to carry them forward until certainly the policies have all been updated with the same group, so we don't have any change and turnover midway, because they may not be fully concluded by the time we go to General Assembly. And then her intention is to continue with an ad hoc committee. She'll just change the date on it because we're calling it General Assembly 2026 ad hoc. So she'll just move it forward to 2027 and then look for people to continue forward those efforts should we need to continue to make changes or look at opportunities to save money on that event and continue it to be the premier event that General Assembly has been for Western Riverside. A lot of people have looked at this event and have carried this forward. I know Orange County has been very interested in it, but we're kind of the big model. And then it's their 35th anniversary year, so this is kind of a milestone marker for us this year. So I'm really looking forward to having a very successful General Assembly. Our keynote speaker, Tony Hawk, has really generated a lot more interest and a lot more excitement than I've expected. So I'm really looking forward to doing that. But other than that, the admin and finance was dark, so we'll go into our regular committee sessions next month and more to come.
Okay, thank you. And Saral? And how about Aqua, Director Denstedt?
Yeah, Aqua, we're going to have a meeting next week, so I'll have more to talk about what our platform is going to be, what events we're going to look forward to, what our programming will look like for a spring conference, and all of that. So more to come after, and I'll provide a better update next meeting.
Okay. All right, we'll move to director comments. Director Gardner, would you like to start?
Sure, I have none.
Okay.
Short and sweet.
And Director Torres?
I have none either.
Okay.
So.
Director Rissy? Oh, do you want to do?
Sure.
Do you have any comments?
Yeah, I went to the CASA conference. This was a different conference. It was a very different conference. And I think I've made some suggestions. I've shared them with my colleague who has a great involvement with CASA, and I think she's in agreement with me. You know, sometimes you need to look at a couple of things and programming-wise, and you need to do a little refresh and a little step back to look at, are you providing the value that people are coming to conference for and what you expect? You know, it's always a really sad thing for me to see on a Friday morning at conference, on last day at conference, when you have a huge exit of people and you've got a very small crowd. And so my suggestion was that perhaps they do a little programming flip. And one of the biggest attended committees that there is on the federal and state legislative updates. So my suggestion was, if you want to hook, you got to keep the people there. You got to hold the good stuff until the very end. So if you want to have full participation at a conference and not have a mass exit on a Friday morning, so, you know, all these speakers that you brought in see very small crowds, then you need to put the state and federal committees, which have huge participation and huge interest in, and save those, save them. And put them in the big room, because you kind of need the big room, because on some conferences, they've not had enough seats, and you've got standing room only, and people line the stuff. So maybe you just move those changes. Some of the tracks that they do at conference are very technical. And I've always tried to say it would be great because you've got people that are trying to still learn about the industry, and it would be great if you could separate the stuff to, you know, the beginner stuff, yeah, where people can just get a better understanding of what this is and why it's important. And then you can go into the more detailed stuff for people that are been there for a while and really get it. Because there are some people that just you talk to at these conferences, they go, I'm completely lost. I have no idea what they were talking about, and I don't know what I just didn't understand it. And then you have a really good, by far the best session was the French guy. Who was talking about shaping the water narrative. And he was very engaging. He was very refreshing. His perspective was very entertaining. I don't know, Director Rizvi, if you can get and share a portion of, perhaps, I don't know if you guys recorded it or not at the conference, but perhaps that would be the session to share with folks of some of his perspective and talking about the ideas and some of the things that he's tried over his career to message out there was really interesting, and he was by far the best speaker at this portion of conference. So again, I'm always looking to go to these things to open my eyes, to give me new perspective, to kind of refresh and shake it out and say, okay, we're starting a new year. Which direction are we going to go in? And this conference was a little short of that some. So, but I think leadership and people that are engaged at the board level really want to hear that feedback so that they can pivot and bring more value at the next one. And I think I have all faith that that's what they'll do, for sure. So just kind of my perspective on a conference attendee that I've been to this a number of times. Yeah. Look forward to attending conference in DC and doing all the things that we need for all the regulations that we're concerned about.
Okay, is that it?
Yes.
All right. Director Rizvi?
Yes, so, yes, we talked about it, we had a board meeting. I think moving the conference in the middle of the first, it was 2 weeks into the new year. I think that was kind of something that a lot of people did not show up, or they were trying to, I think, rush Friday. Most of the people left Friday morning, and I saw that was the need that need to be discussed in our next board meeting. I think that was it, and it was due to, I think, that Renaissance, some big golf, Palm Spring golf tournament is coming up next week, so that's why they had to move up, because the hotel had told them to move up, and it's going to be like that for next year too. But that's something that I was talking to Adam, our executive director, and we did say that maybe do better promotion, maybe do something different. That we did see a decline in not registration but participation in there. So, and then we had a board meeting. It was general item. We talked about our audit's going to be ready to be presented next month. And then we approved our 5-year strategic priorities, which is PFAS. And as Greg was mentioning, PFAS in wastewater, and now we're discussing, a lot of it was being discussed as PFAS in biosolids. And a lot of states are coming up with legislation, and what are we doing and how are we getting ready to deal that. That was a big part of that board meeting. Yes, it was discussed that this year CASA will not be involved in any PFAS legislation, but we will be participating in a spot on bill for clean fleet regulations. So it's going to come up. We're going to be deciding what's going to be in the next meeting. So yeah, and that was it for the board meeting. I did go ahead and participated in a couple of sessions, and as Director Dunstan mentioned, the best part was this presentation. And let me share a few. I have the presentation. I'm going to share that. The speaker was Anton Walter, and he, the presentation really was a YouTuber talking about, you know, let's see. So when he started his presentation, and it was very interesting of how, like, what are the worst words that I'm like, they went and surveyed what are the worst word to use for water recycling or what. So the fifth was recycled, fourth was reclaimed, the third was non-traditional, second was treated wastewater, and the worst term to use for was reused.
Oh.
Yeah, and that said, this is what we've been using,
Yeah.
you know, and I'm like, this is what we use in our terms. And for normal public, these are the worst words you can use. So changing that narrative of how I'm like, and the best terms were pure, all natural, advanced purified. So these are something that I'm like, you know, they were talking about how to change our narrative of when we talk about CASA and how are we dealing with it, you know, poo, that comes up on. It's just general perception is poop water. I'm like, and we need to change that narrative. So it was a great presentation. I will ask them if they can share with us.
Yeah, that'd be nice.
Yeah. And other than that, as I said, it was compared to other conferences, this was a little on the low side, and these are discussions that we're going to be coming up for the next month. All righty.
Very good. Okay. I already asked you, Director Torres, didn't I?
Yes. You did.
Okay. All right. Sorry. Lost track there for a second. I don't have anything specific, but when I was making my cup of hot tea earlier today, on the little tea bag is a quote, and I'd kind of forgotten with this particular tea that it's on there. And this reminded me of a city council member that I served with a long time ago, one of our original council members. Many of our meetings, he would end with some sort of a quote. And so I kind of like this one. Life is like a cup of tea. It's how you make it. So I will leave you with that. And are there any future agenda items? No? Okay, Mr. Ballinger, would you take us into closed session, please?
Yes, the board will be meeting to discuss the two items that are listed on the agenda, and then we'll be reconvening to report any removal action.
12/25. And Mr. Ballinger, do you report or Mr. Miller report?
Oh, you want me to go? I'll go. Okay. Reporting out on closed session, the board unanimously has decided to hire Barnes and Thornburg for special counsel on PFAS, other water quality issues, and some groundwater basin issues on the Santa Ana River.
Okay, thank you.
And on the second item,
Oh.
no, there's no reportable action on the second item.
Okay. We have an information item, investment report for November of 2025. Our next meeting is Wednesday, February 4th, 2026. I can't believe we'll already be in February. I have to stop saying Happy New Year now. At 9:30,